rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the Biha Hayat Presents Muslimfest 2020, presented by Darwana and Sound Vision. My name is Miriam and I'll be your host for Muslimfest Kids Hour. We are so excited to be here with you all, bringing everyone some positivity and creative energy with a great lineup of Muslim artists and talent. Although our festival looks a little different this year, it was important for us to make sure we do things in the safest way possible. This year, Muslimfest is taking place from Wednesday, July 15th to Sunday, July 19th. Each day we will have family fun, kids programming at 11, and creative workshops at 3 p.m. Today we will be hosting a unique drive-in experience in the evening. Muslimfest is sponsored by Zabiha Halal, Penny Appeal, Wutan Kebab, Aya Financial, and Moya Financial. Our drive-in venue partner is ISNA Canada, and a shout out to my dad from Naviga Media. Before we jump into today's show, here's a message from our sponsors and supporters without whom this week would not be possible.
Okay, we're here, so you take it.
I'm not taking it.
No, take it.
Why should I take it?
You named it, you take it.
Why, I didn't name it.
I have a cooler car, so you take it.
Exactly. The better car, the better ride. She'll enjoy it. Air conditioning.
You know what? No one's taking it.
Fulfill your Qurbani with Penny Appeal Canada. Visit pennyappeal.ca to get started.
Ray Lacina is an English prof at a two-year college in Michigan. He got into the profession because he loves to write and then discovered that he loves teaching as well. His first poem, I like birds and they like me, but I live in a house and they live in a tree. Clearly destined for greatness from the start, Ray later went on to complete his PhD in American Literature at the University of Toronto. He began teaching his career in Saudi Arabia after brief excursions into corporate Canada, before landing his current gig in 2002. Throughout, he has returned again and again for his love for writing, eventually moving on from ornithological verse to T.S. Eliot, seriously, T.S. Eliot, verse to fiction. Both speculative and mainstream, he lives in Michigan with his beautiful wife and strapping son. Over to you, Ray.
Hi, everyone. So today's workshop is on creative nonfiction. And what is creative nonfiction? It is not just reporting the facts. So I'm not asking you to do pieces of journalism here. Creative nonfiction is writing about reality. It's drawing from experience, drawing from the world around you, but it is doing something creative with it. In other words, it's using the facts of life or the experiences you've had to make a larger point. And I'll show you an example of that, a really wonderful blog actually written by my sister, which does exactly that. It's a wonderful example of memoir. And just to justify the background here, I'm in a hotel room. So I thought rather than you looking at the back of the hotel room behind me, I would use a virtual background. If you watched my workshop on Wednesday, you saw the Star Wars background, and I did manage to tie that in. So this is the other background I had handy as I started filming this. But if you recognize it, it's Bag End from the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. And really, it's appropriate in a way because who is one of the most famous memoirists ever? It's Bilbo Baggins, right? Bilbo Baggins is, at the end of The Hobbit, writes the story of his adventures. And Frodo, at the end of The Lord of the Rings, finishes those and completes them and then gives them off to Sam when he leaves past the Two Towers. And there you go. That tells you so much about me that I had all those facts at the tip of my tongue. So at any rate, that is my kind of lame tie-in for the background behind me. So today's workshop is going to focus on creative nonfiction. Creative nonfiction is, like I said, is taking the facts of your life or your experiences or things that you've encountered in the world around you, and it's doing something with those. Now, what's important about a workshop is that it's going to include some work. So you do, if you want to get the most out of this, do be prepared to write. And I'll give you time as we work through the workshop to write. I'll pause and watch you awkwardly through the camera, or I can't really see you, but I'll be gazing awkwardly into the camera as you write. But I'll give you time to try the things that we're talking about and work towards building up to a flash memoir, a very, very brief memoir. And the example I'm going to show you of memoir is an example of flash memoir. It's a blog written by my sister, actually, who's a wonderful memoirist and poet who writes about her experiences overseas, but she also writes about her upbringing, memories of home. She lived in Yemen for a number of years, so there's a lot of her writing there is about her experience in Yemen, but a lot of it too is born out of homesickness and her memories of home. So that's what we're going to get into today. So I'm going to start my presentation. So as I get going on the presentation, that wouldn't be a bad time to run away and grab a pen or a pencil, a laptop, a device that you can write on, something that you can use to work through the exercises as we work through. Okay, so here we go. So the presentation, as I said, is on creative nonfiction. And I think the subtitle is here is very important, especially, well, for all of us in these days. So much of our lives have changed because of the current pandemic, because of things happening in the world. And I think there will be a time not that far in the future, but certainly future historians will be looking back, and the things that you write now about your experiences in this time will be really significant and meaningful. And I think it's important. One of the things that they encourage young people to do, especially early in the pandemic, was to keep a journal so that in future they would be able to look back and remember what this time was like. And you know, I would encourage you to do that as well. Of course, your life is always meaningful, and especially those of us who are living in a minority community in these days, in a minority faith in these days, for those of us who are Muslim. There's a lot of our experiences that forget about COVID. There are a lot of your experiences that are worth having other people learn about. So this is really about being heard. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what creative nonfiction is and isn't. One thing it isn't is just an ego trip, or it shouldn't be. So you're not telling your story to make yourself look good. You're not telling your story just because you think you're super interesting. You're telling your story because there's something in that story that people can benefit from and take away from it. So what is creative nonfiction? Some examples: memoir and biography. So memoir is when you write about your own experience. It's a little bit different from autobiography. Biography is when you write the story of someone's life. So from beginning to end, this is what happened in this person's life. Autobiography is writing that story about your life. Memoir is a lot of times more focused. A memoir can be a little bit like autobiography. It can cover a long span of time, but typically the memoir focuses on some specific period in your life or some specific element in your life. So for example, a writer or an artist might write a memoir of their writing. And so they would trace their journey as writers, and they wouldn't worry about every single fact in their biography, everything that happened to them finding its way in there, because that's not the meaning of it. Someone might write a memoir about a specific time. Like someday you may write a memoir about living in the time of pandemic. People might write a memoir about a specific relationship or a specific experience. Travel writing is a kind of creative nonfiction. And this is when, of course, you're writing about your travels. But again, the difference between this and like those Barron's guides that you might buy if you're going to Spain is that travel writing, when it's from a creative perspective, it's as much about your experience as you travel, as it is about the facts of whatever place you're traveling to. So this is what makes it creative. So there are subject matters, there's subject matter that is similar in nature to creative nonfiction, which wouldn't qualify. So, if you were to just do a Wikipedia article about someone's life, and it was just aimed at giving the facts of that person's life, that wouldn't be creative nonfiction. It'd be a kind of biography, but there would be no creativity to it. There'd be nothing of you in it. Similarly, if you were to write a travel guide, Spain on $10 a day, that would be kind of nonfiction, but it wouldn't be creative nonfiction. What makes this creative is what you bring to it. The personal essay, which is just a short piece of writing. And it's the kind of thing if you've been in college or even in high school, I think this is the sort of thing your teachers make you write in your classes. But it is actually a very common form of creative nonfiction. These things are published as articles in magazines. So the personal essay is just an essay about some very specific element in your life. And it zeroes in. And again, what makes it creative is you're making meaning from that. You're sharing something about that you want readers to take away from it. Literary journalism, and this is something like you might see feature pieces in magazines like The Atlantic. And this is, again, where the journalist isn't just reporting facts. So it's not a newspaper article. It's not, a CNN news story. It is the journalist going beyond that to make meaning of those facts. And it's a very specific genre. And like I said, you mainly find it in magazines like The Atlantic that publish a lot of literary everything, right? And so pieces in there may be very specifically crafted in this genre. And then the blog, really that's your personal, your personal website, or even a vlog. Vlog is that video version of the blog when you get on YouTube or Instagram and you talk about your experiences. It is a form of creative nonfiction. I don't want to limit this to just writing. I'm a writing teacher, and so I'm going to be inclined to limit it to writing or focus on writing. But a well-crafted vlog, for one thing, it will have some kind of a script. Yes, as you talk, it's going to feel spontaneous, and you're going to say things that occur to you along the way. But if you are trying to craft something that's going to be 5-10 minutes long, which is really, you don't want to go a lot longer than that in most videos. This is an exception because it's a workshop. If you're going to craft something that's fairly short and really meaningful, you're not going to want to just sit down and ramble. And the best vlogs that you read are going to be either people who have done it enough that they can kind of make that structure in their mind as they're going, or people who've actually written scripts and they're good enough at delivering it that you don't know that it's a script. So the blog or vlog can really be a medium for any of the above. So you can do a memoir on your blog, you can do travel writing on your blog, and if you go out there and look at popular blogs, you'll see they cover all sorts of things. And some of them are purely informational in nature, like makeup tips and things like that. But some of them are people reflecting on their experiences in a way that would qualify as creative nonfiction. So writing about you, and these are, I've got little snippets here on the screen of my life and experience. And these are the sorts of things, if I were going to write a short memoir of some kind, I wouldn't write about what it's been like being Ray Lacina for the last 54 years. I might zero in on the far left. This is a picture of my eldest sister who passed away from cancer, I almost said a few years ago, but it's been almost 20 years now. And she's with my next eldest sister when they were really young. And just this picture, and by the way, if you're looking for ideas for memoir writing, going through old pictures is a really terrific way to get those ideas. This picture calls to mind that, she was a certain thing in my life, and I saw her go through the end of her life, and yet, she lived this whole complete experience apart from me. And this is an example of her childhood, a moment from her childhood when she had no idea of some of the hardships she would face over the course of her life. The picture next to that is my dad. It's his college football days. My dad was a football player. And I think a lot about him. If I wanted to focus on things about a lot I could say about him. I could write about the fact that I was never really into sports. I was never very good at sports. But he supported me in everything I did. So when I played Dungeons and Dragons, he would always come down into the basement with snacks. And he would always ask us who was winning, and we'd always explain that no one wins Dungeons and Dragons. Or when I did theater in college or started publishing my writing, he was always really excited about that stuff. And now my son is very much into sports, and I'm learning a lot of the sports for the first time so that I can really fully enjoy what he does. And just as my dad had developed this passion for the things I was passionate about, I find myself developing a passion for the things my son's passionate about, at least when he's taking part in them. So I love to watch him play soccer. I love to watch him play basketball. And I've learned enough about those sports to really appreciate it genuinely, not just to kind of sit and passively smile while he's doing it. The picture next to that is where we lived. We lived in Saudi Arabia for a number of years. That's the apartment we lived in. Again, there's a lot I could dip into in that experience to write about, but it would be something specific. The picture on the far right, my college roommates. And that is me on the left in the goofy glasses in the sunglasses. And yeah, those were different days. And two of these roommates have since passed away. And so again, not to make it imply every memoir has to be depressing, but that would be certainly something to reflect on. Our relationship, what we were like then, and then the weight of losing people who passed very young. You just never imagine losing people who were your friends in college because you're the same age as them, you're in perfectly good health, or you hope you are, and it's a shock. It comes as a shock when they're suddenly gone from the world. So these are examples of the sorts of things you might write about, and the way you might grab photographs, little snippets of your life, and pluck stories out of them and make meaning of them. So two things you saw there. I reflected on what these things really meant to me. But also I tried to narrow down to some specific aspect of each. So for example, there's so many things I could say about my dad. There's so many things I could say about my sister, so many things I could say about my college experience, so many things I could say about living in Saudi Arabia. But for any specific piece of writing, right, you want to focus on a single slice, and that will allow you to deliver something that has that meat to it that your readers are then going to really connect with. They're going to resonate with. Oops, I'm clicking on the picture. So what personal writing is not, and this is extremely important. Oops, I went back. One too far. There we go. Personal writing isn't self-promotion, and that's something to be very conscious of, and especially in a world in which, let me move my picture back up again, a world in which a lot of us have side gigs that might push us to promote ourselves. You know, if you're involved with fitness products, for example, you might have a blog of your fitness journey, and it's not really about you sharing your experience. It's a way of trying to draw in customers to sell that thing that you are selling, but also just trying to promote, you know, who you are. And social media culture is such, and Instagram's a perfect example, where so much of the focus is on the ego. So much is the focus is on presenting a version of yourself which is very idealized, just so people will look at you and you'll get followers and there'll be all this hype around you. That is not creative nonfiction. That's not personal writing done properly. Okay, you're not writing to promote yourself. You're drawing from your experience to share something that says something about the human condition that your readers can then connect with. It's not just telling people stuff that you know. It's not teaching people. That's technical writing or educational writing. It can be done, that can be done in a somewhat creative way, but it certainly isn't personal in nature. And this is the tricky thing. The personal writing is ultimately not just about you. In other words, you're the subject of it, yes. But just like if you're going to use, for example, the Lord of the Rings, which is behind me, as an example of a piece of writing, it is not about Frodo Baggins. It is not about Sam Gamgee, right? What is it about? These are the characters that are in it, but it's about all the stuff that unfolds around them. And it's not just the events that happen to them, right? It's the lessons that are learned there about companionship, about what's valuable, what's important, about the ability of small people to do big things, of personal bravery, all those sorts of things. Well-written memoir draws from your experience, but it's about more than that. So if you're writing about your experience, for example, of losing a parent to a disease, the experience is maybe the skeleton of that, but ultimately, what are you writing about? What it feels like to lose a parent to a terrible disease. It's that experience that is the focus of it. You're just providing the context for that. So what it should be is, first of all, a process of discovery. Even when you're writing about yourself, right? Anytime you approach a writing task, you have to, in your mind, imagine that you're going to learn more about the thing than you know at the beginning. So if you take a photograph and you start writing about that photograph, you need to be open to discovering things that you feel about the people in the photograph, the time the photograph was taken, that you may not be consciously aware of. A lot of times, people who are working through difficult things find memoir writing a very helpful way of working through those things, because when they write their memoirs, when they dig in and write about that experience, they are discovering how they really feel about it. They're making connections they might not have made otherwise had they not kind of slowed down and sunk themselves into it. Because of that, it can be sometimes uncomfortable. And this is why you do need to have in your mind the division between what you're writing initially for yourself as a draft and what will be shared with other people. What you write is yours. And so when you are writing, you can be as honest as you want to be, and you really do need to be. And if your honesty is taking you into places that make you uncomfortable, when you're writing your draft, when you're on your own computer writing, you need to follow them there. Then if you decide to send that in for publication or post it on your blog or something like that, then you can step back and ask yourself how much you're really willing to share. Oftentimes the most powerful writing, though, is the stuff that shares this uncomfortable material. So do you have conflicted feelings about a parent, for example, and you're telling the story of a very specific experience in which the good and the bad were both present? Maybe you feel uncomfortable sharing the fact that you have some bad feelings about a parent, but those might be things that many other people can see value in because they themselves struggle with the same thing. Okay. It's also, there's a difference between navel gazing and self-reflection. And navel gazing is a phrase that's used to just sort of sink yourself into kind of overthinking everything, right? Self-reflection is, I guess, kind of navel gazing light. In other words, it is an opportunity for you to step back and think carefully, not only about what happened, but what you brought to what happened and how you feel about what happened. So what role did you play in events, right? How did events impact you? Navel gazing, you can just sink in and analyze and overanalyze and overanalyze, and that's not the purpose of all of this. It can go that route, and maybe that would be meaningful in a specific kind of writing or on it with a specific subject, but that's not ultimately the purpose of personal writing. Okay, so this is what it is at its best, and this is one of the powers of personal writing. To begin with, it's a journey of discovery. Okay, so in other words, even if you never publish a word that you write, that journey is going to be useful to you, or could be useful to you. Once you decide to publish what you write, though, then it's a form of expression. But it does not need to be. It is initially, and most importantly, an opportunity for you to come to understand yourself and your life more deeply, and to make meaning of it. Oh, sorry. I'm in a hotel, so you may hear some background noise. Initially, I want to make sure that the door had closed properly. So I'm going to read just a snippet from Yemeni Journey is my sister's pseudonym, her pen name, for her blog that she wrote for many years. It's now been taken down, but I snuffed some examples of it before it was taken down. So I'm going to just pause this recording, and then I'm going to pull up an example of her writing and show you what it looks like when this is being done well. So just give me one moment. Okay, so this is one of my sister's blog posts, and it's Mom's Brownies, and it is her remembering my mom's brownies. But notice how it becomes a reflection on much more than that, and I will let you read it over on the screen. Maybe I'll make the view just a little bit, or I'll do a full screen on it. That is 100%, sorry. I was going to, let me zoom in a little bit to make it, the font just a little bigger, and I'll scroll down as I read, but also you can just listen to me read it. That is perfectly acceptable. So, I don't remember a time when my mother wasn't ill. I know in my head that she once was pain-free, moved easily, laughed with the careless abandon of a child. In my memory, though, she is always careful. Careful in the way she held her head, shoulders tense, as though expecting pain to hit at any time. Careful in the way she walked, placing her feet gingerly to the ground, afraid of falling and ripping her tender paper-like skin. Careful in the way she spoke, telling my sister, if I told people how I really felt, they would never ask again. The lupus struck her, and struck her hard, but she kept on going, largely, I suspect, for us. I started taking over whatever tasks I could for her when I was still a little girl. I remember doing the dishes with Dad, him washing, me drying and putting away, while Mom sat at the kitchen table keeping us company. Cleaning the house, giving it a good weekly vacuum and dusting, and trying to keep it neat the rest of the time so she wouldn't feel that she had to do any of the work. Folding the laundry without much finesse, making Dad's dress shirts look a bit like origami, but mostly I remember cooking. I learned to cook from my mother. She couldn't stand behind me and direct me, but I would carry the bowls and pots to the table to show her. Is this right? Does this look done? Do I need more water? I cooked spaghetti and meatballs. baked beef roast, and made a righteous fruit salad. But my heart, especially at that young age, was only truly engaged when I was baking. I loved to bake. I loved the careful measuring, the energetic stirring, and the precise final touches. Cookies, cakes, pies, and puddings. My family never had it so good. In fact, I liked to bake even more than they liked to eat. So I ended up baking for grandma, baking for the parish priest, baking for bake sales, and baking for the group of friends that got together with my brother and me on weekends to play in the forest out back or in our basement. That's our Dungeons and Dragons group. Early on, I found the joy that came from the simple act of cooking and feeding people. And that has never left me. These are my mom's brownies. I know that the recipe probably originally came from a Hershey syrup can, but I remember it scrawled across a slightly yellowed index card in my mom's loopy, cockeyed writing. The back had chocolate stripes across it, and one corner was missing. So, with a tip of the hat to Hershey's, here is the recipe for Mom's brownies. Enjoy them, and don't forget to share the love. Now, this is a recipe. I could, if you want that, ask in the comments after you've seen this, and maybe I'll share it with you in the comments. So on the surface of this, it's a recipe. But see how it's so much more than a recipe. It becomes a reflection on our mother's illness. My mom was diagnosed with lupus in her late 40s. And so she lived with the disease for a very long time, which is a good thing. But the toll it took on her body, and the toll that the prednisone, which she took to treat it on her body, is very much as my sister describes it here. But it also then explores my sister's connecting with my mother through cooking and all the things that came to mean for her. And you can see the way the piece begins. Why is it so meaningful for her? Because she's embodying these qualities that my mother had embodied. So the ways in which my mother celebrated family, celebrated companionship through cooking, my sister came to do that. And it really becomes a metaphor for the ways in which my sister, for example, is the family archivist. My mother was the one who had all the crazy stories about the family. My younger sister is the one who has retained a lot of those and kept a lot of those. So this is a beautiful example of creative nonfiction. On the surface, it's a recipe. What's included in it is the stuff that happened. What my sister did with it, though, is far more than that. It's a beautiful example of a reflection. But it's more than just the subject matter. It's beautifully written. The language of the piece you would see this kind of language in a short story, in a novel, some of it even in a poem, right? So it's been crafted. It's not just what happened. It's what happened crafted in such a way that it takes on greater meaning. So let's take a stab at this ourselves. So what is our process going to be? First of all, we're going to do some brainstorming. And I love the phrase opening up for brainstorming, because that's really what it's all about. The goal of trying to get ideas is to get as many ideas as possible. And then when you find one that's interesting, to explore it openly without worrying about it, without self-editing, without trying to decide what's going to work and what's not going to work in these early stages. And this is where, I mentioned earlier that done properly, personal writing is exploratory writing. It's a chance to learn about yourself. This opening up phase is where a lot of that happens. So we'll brainstorm, you'll explore some of the things you brainstormed, you'll ask some questions in order to try to pluck out a moment. And in that moment, or in a few key moments, try to pluck out the themes. In other words, what is it, when you write about this, what is it you're really writing about? When my sister wrote about brownies, she's not really writing about brownies, is she? Right? And then telling. And the telling comes down to initially just sketching out your ideas. And we're going to do a very brief memoir, which is I'm going to call it a flash memoir. But it's basically a sketch of what you might do if you want to tell that more fully. Once you've done that, then we're going to look a little bit very briefly at some of the elements of story that you want to follow, because creative nonfiction oftentimes draws from the techniques of fiction in terms of how you plot things, how things happen, how you shape that story. Okay? So one thing I just want to put in a pitch for is the idea of journaling. It really is extremely helpful, especially if you want to write. Even if you don't want to write, recording snippets of your thoughts every day. And this can become a spiritual practice. You can reflect in part on how you think you did that day, things you thought you did well with, things you would like to improve in. I have been for a little more than a year now, and I may talk about this briefly at the end if I have time, but I probably won't have time, writing a poem a day. And in that regard, poetry is not typically considered creative nonfiction, but the poems that I write every day will draw from something going on around me that day. And it might just be something I watched, I heard, whatever. It may not be an event, but in some ways, those poems are crafting a journal of some precise idea, insight, emotion, or sometimes event that happens on the days that I write them. So I really recommend this. And if you're thinking of writing your memoirs, for example, someday, or you want to engage, you kind of dive into some of this creative nonfiction, having stuff recorded is invaluable. You will not remember the things you think you'll remember later on. If I were to go back and write a memoir of my college days, it would be pulling teeth. I have very specific, powerful memories, but in terms of the sequence of events, in terms of things that, exactly what happened when, aside from certain set pieces, certain important events, this play that I was in, this time my friends and I went and had fun together, or this class I had that was especially meaningful, whatever. Aside from those set pieces, the little small day-to-day stuff that glues them together, I've now lost. If I journaled, if I'd kept a record of that stuff, I could go and revisit those journals. Sometimes remember how I felt at the time, because oftentimes when you look back on your life, you see it through the lens of the present. So you remember childhood, and a lot of us will kind of have this, childhood has this kind of warm glow over it, like everything was perfect. But we have struggles in childhood, and sad things happen, and there are days we feel awfully, it's absolutely terrible. And although you might not journal as a child, if you're journaling as a young adult, you're much closer to that period. We're much more likely to get an accurate feeling. You at least will know how you felt on that day as you're going back and trying to make sense of it and revisit it for your writing. So we're going to start with 3 lists of 10, and I'll give you a few minutes to write each as we go. Now, the reason we do lists of 10 is that at the beginning of the list, you will have the kind of easy things will come to mind. So I'm talking about memories. List 10 experiences or places you can't forget. So if you're married, your wedding is going to be one of these. If you're not married, maybe high school graduation will be one of these. There'll be certain kind of set pieces, right, that come to mind immediately. More recent things might come to mind immediately. As you get to the bottom of that list, as you start really reaching to try to get 10, you might pull out things that you hadn't at first thought about that might be a lot more meaningful, or at least a lot more interesting to write about. Everybody graduates high school, and many of our experiences are very similar. Unless something happened to you on your high school graduation that's specific, you may not have a lot to write about that's going to be fresh and original. But as you start digging down, maybe there's a vacation place your family went during the summers that you'd kind of forgotten about. Right? You get to item 8 or 9, you're trying to figure out what you're going to say next. And then you suddenly think about this lake you used to go to as kids. And as you think about the lake, you think about some of the things that happened there with your family. And suddenly you open up this area of memory that you can explore and discover whole new worlds there. So I'm going to have you start by listing 10 experiences or places that you can't forget. And I'll give you just a few minutes to do that. Okay, turning points. 10 moments in your life when your life changed in some profound, fundamental way. Now, this may have some overlap with those memories. Maybe some of the moments that came to mind that you can't forget are turning points. And this one, you may not get to 10 because of that. It may be harder to find something this specific, but think about moments when you feel your life made a significant turn. Something happened, or you made some internal decision, so that from that point on, things weren't as they had been before. Okay. And our last, and these are quick lists, so just do 5 of each of these. It's whatever comes to mind when you think of each of these words: regrets, losses, blessings, firsts, and hopes. And again, there may be a little bit of overlap. Try to think of fresh things, but just quick 5 items for each of these lists. And again, I'll give you a minute or 2 to do it, but just generate them as quickly as you can. And whatever comes to mind, put down, because again, this is for you to generate ideas. It's nothing anybody else is ever going to see, so they can be silly. They can be very personal. They can be things you never told anybody about. For your list here, include them. And then you can decide what you want to do with what afterwards when you start writing. So regrets, losses, blessings, firsts, hopes, and 5 of each quickly. I'll give you a minute or 2 to do that. Okay. I'll tell you, one of the hardest things about teaching writing, I teach writing at a college in Michigan, is giving students enough time to write, because those silences feel like they're forever when you're not actually doing the writing. If you need more time, you know, this is recorded. It's going to be on Facebook Live. You can, after you watch this, return to the recording on the page and work through these again, and just pause it and give yourself as much time as you want throughout the process. So just remember, you do have access to these recordings on, I believe you do at least, on the Muslimfest Facebook page after the session actually finishes. So you can go back, if you just drag the little whatever, circle over on the bar and get to the middle of the thing, get to this point, so you don't have to listen to all my blah, blah, blah earlier on, and then work through this process bit by bit, again, pausing it to give yourself time to do the writing. Okay, these are some other great techniques, and I may give you time to pick one of them. Okay, whoops, went too fast. Sorry about that. I always click one more time than I should. So these are 2 other possibilities, and these are 2 different brainstorming techniques that if you've not tried these before, they are worth keeping in mind as another way of opening things up for you. Clustering is a visual technique. And what you do with a cluster is you draw a circle in the middle of a piece of paper, and in that circle you put your subject. And then from that, you draw little arrows out to things related to your subject, and each of those gets a circle, and then each of those circles can get more circles. So if your house was getting swallowed by a sinkhole, what item would you grab as you ran out the door if you use this as the beginning of a brainstorming technique, right? In the middle circle, you would put the name of that item. So I might grab my, what would I probably grab? What would be handy? Let's say TESB probably is what it would be, because it's usually what's right by me. But let's go with something more interesting. My glasses would also be, actually, let's go with my glasses, because sadly I was going to go with something deeply meaningful and personal, but I would have to grab my glasses. Why would I have to grab my glasses? Well, then I could explore that, right? So one line might go to a circle that has, I can't read without them. And then from that circle, I would generate more ideas. I can't read without them. How do I feel about that? Right? One might be the memory of when I realized I was going to need reading glasses, when I kept making the font on my Kindle bigger and bigger and it was staying blurry. One could be the fear of someday being left someplace without my glasses and having to negotiate the world without them, which is a real fear For anybody who wears glasses, I'm thankfully my far vision is fine. But even with reading, so many things, even as you read, as eyesight gets worse, even driving a car, sometimes I'm still fine at this, but sometimes you'll see older people actually have trouble seeing things inside the car. They need to have bifocals so they can see inside the car through the bifocal lens and outside the car through the other corrective lens. So each of these ideas could get its own circle, and then I would expand and expand and expand. So you wind up with is one of those kind of conspiracy theory maps on the wall or on a piece of paper that have all these possibilities mapped out. And the nice thing about clustering is it's not sequential. So when you do free writing, which we're going to do in a bit too, you're on a piece of paper writing beginning to end. Clustering, you can add an idea up here, you can add an idea up here, and then keep letting them kind of expand out and go back and forth between them. And it's very easy. You're not trying to squeeze things into a block of text. Collage writing is just, it's sort of like free writing, but it's going one idea after the other. So if you think of a collage is, you know, a bunch of images pasted together. Now these images are related somehow, typically, right? So you might have a collage of your wedding day, for example, if you're married. It'll be pictures of, you know, in the morning getting ready, going to the masjid or the church or whatever, and then afterwards, whatever family gathering you had afterwards. All these things might tie together. You might have some personal shots of interacting with family or with your spouse or whatever during that time. And you put these together to give readers a complete sense of that. So collage writing has you just remembering these snippets and pulling them together. It can be a powerful way to then, you know, present that experience. In other words, this is brainstorming. Maybe the final piece would be a collage of some type, but you would want to go in, first of all, craft each little moment so it's really well written and says exactly what you want it to say, and then sequence them, think about the order in which you want readers to experience those. Okay, fast writing. So fast writing, free writing, you've probably done this in school before. You put your pen to paper or your fingers to the keyboard and you keep writing and you don't edit yourself and you try your best not to stop. You try your best just to keep going. And I'm going to give you like close on 5 minutes for this. And this is usually a 10, 15 minute exercise. I think it's a bit hard to stare at me on the screen for 5 minutes, but I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do this. So go over your lists. I'll give you just a second to do that right now. Just choose anything that leaps out at you. What just seems interesting? Kind of go with your gut. Okay, because if it sparks your interest now, you'll probably find it easier to do the next step. Now, I'm only going to have you do this once, but if you were really searching for something to write about, you would do this. You would pick out one snippet from your free writing. You'd write on that for maybe 10 minutes. And then you'd pick something else, write on that for maybe 10 minutes, pick something else, write on that for maybe 10 minutes. What does this do? Well, you might wind up with 3 really great story ideas, or you might realize something that interested you initially, like you picked your wedding day because you thought, okay, well, that's going to be easy to write about. But you found you really don't have anything, you describe it, you just describe it. And when you read that, you think, oh, no one's going to care about this because it's like everybody else's wedding day. There's nothing here that stands out. So you discover in your free writing that maybe that's not something good to write about. Something else, the day that you, the last time maybe you slept with a baby blanket, right? That's powerful, right? Maybe you had this thing with you in college, and then at some point you moved from the dorm, you got a job, you packed it up with the things that were in the dorm, those went into storage someplace, you go to your new town where you're working, and you never go back and get that, and suddenly it's gone from your life. And that's a very powerful moment, and it can come to represent the significance of graduating college, of the sort of, you're an adult in college, but adulthood really kicks in, you could say, when you enter the workforce, when that responsibility comes down on you. So that's really potentially very powerful. So that might seem like a very small thing, insignificant, that winds up opening up and being something really fantastic. And you have a lot to say about it once you start doing that. So for now, and you can do this, I will give you maybe, I'll give you 5 or 6 minutes. You can do this. If you pick one and you start and you don't like it, start another one. For our purposes, what you're mainly doing right here is trying to decide what you think would be interesting or fun or meaningful for you to write about. So I am looking at my phone. I will give you 5 minutes on this. Maybe I'll squeeze out an extra minute if I don't get too anxious. Okay, I made the mistake of not looking at my phone before that, so I was kind of guessing whether that was 5 minutes. I guesstimated where we started. So if I cheated you out of a few minutes, again, come back to this and you can work through this process again. And really, if you're interested in trying this kind of writing, I would do the and again bit of this slide as well. I would go back and spend a good, and do more than 5 or 10 minutes. Just really dive into that scene. Do at least 5 minutes, but shoot for 10 minutes. And then go back and revisit those lists again or generate new lists and circle around until you find something that really sparks your interest. And do this, I would do this in a journal. I would do this in a specific file on your phone or on your laptop, because you want this to be someplace you can keep it. Because maybe you choose one of these to work with today. And maybe you're excited enough after this workshop to start developing that into like a full-blown blog post or even the seeds of a full-blown memoir, like you want to write something much longer. That's great, but then in future, you may come back and want another idea. And something that doesn't quite click for you today, you might be at a different point in your life or just in a different mood on a given day. And one of the other memories that you jotted down suddenly means something different for you, or suddenly your mind just kind of pours into that. Today, maybe you are thinking about your wedding day and something really strange happened. It was like rain on your wedding day, and wasn't it ironic? That's a very bad reference to a 90s song. But something specific did happen that you wanted to write about. Somebody passed away on your wedding day, for example, and you really wanted to reflect on the meaning of that. And then a month down the road, it's the baby blanket story that just resonates with you. You're going through a change in your life, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, this is really something I need to write about right now. So try to keep these someplace where you have them so you can come back to them later on. So the narrowing down is trying to think about, okay, you've got this event in mind. For this to be a piece of creative nonfiction, it's not going to just describe the event. Remember, creative nonfiction isn't about the things that happened, the things that you saw, the things that you're describing. They're about the meaning in those things. Okay, so as you start trying to look among these possibilities for what to write about, look for these things that might lead you to start generating that meaning, or identifying what is going to have more to say, what you have more to say about. Abundance, what did you find it very easy to write about? What produced a lot of writing? Surprise, and this is a fantastic one. As you were brainstorming or making those lists, did anything surprise you? Did anything catch you off guard? A lot of times that reaction, once you reflect on it, that gets you kind of to the pith, to the heart of what you're writing about, of what that memory is about for you. Confusion, did something raise a lot of questions? Exploring those questions might walk you down the road to your real subject. What is it that this event really means to you? And there's something called loop writing, which is a great technique if you have this moment in mind, but you don't quite yet have enough to work on. You choose that moment, and then you go back through this whole brainstorming process again, focusing on that moment. So what are 10 things that really stood out from my wedding day? Okay, then going over those 10 things, what are some of these things that I want to free write about or fast write about? Once I fast write about those, when I look at those, what generated the most writing? What caught me off guard? What raised more questions? That's a way of kind of circling in on your subject, but it's also a way of starting to generate a lot of the details that will then make your blog post, your memoir, more meaningful and impactful for your readers. Okay, so take a minute or two and look over what you've written. Okay, choose a subject that just feels right to you. Now, questions you consider as you try to choose a subject are listed here. I'll go over them in just a second, but it may be your gut just tells you, no, this is the thing that I really want to write about today. So what generates questions? What questions do you have about these various moments in your life that you've dipped into? Okay, what's the most important thing you have to say about that moment? What stands out? That, or it can be a place, it can be a memory, a person from the past. And then from that, is there a scene or a conversation or a setting that really stands out? And that's really the heart of it, because when you start getting down to that, then you start generating the details that are going to help you tell your story of that moment. So questions. What's the most important thing you have to say about that place, that person, that thing? Then are there scenes or moments that really stand out? And if you're working with just one story at this point, if there's one moment that you've already picked and settled on, then you can use these to query that one moment. If you haven't decided yet, then see where these questions take you. And again, which of those moments, which of those events that you just generated produces the most? Which one has a very vivid memory attached to it? Which one raises a lot of interesting questions? Which one really carries a lot of emotional weight? You really have something to say about that moment. It really meant something to you. That will help you choose which one to write about. If you've picked which one to write about already, reflecting on it through these questions will help you start to generate the things that you're going to say about it. So again, I'm going to give you a few minutes to choose, not as long to choose because we are coming up on time, but a few minutes to choose. Okay, I think that was like a minute. I cheated you a little bit there, but I want to, again, if you're really enjoying this and it's something you really want to explore, I would come back and revisit it and just pause it as you're working through to do the brainstorming. So here's some of the basics of storytelling, and I'm going to just put them all up on the screen and go over them quickly, because when you start remembering an event, people are interested in hearing things in a certain way. Stories are told a certain way. If you know somebody who just tells great stories, right? They can sit at a party, at a dinner, and just everyone's fascinated because they go over something that happened to them even that day, and they make it sound interesting. Underneath all of that, you're going to find, if you really analyze the story they're telling, you're probably going to find these elements present there. So these are the elements of good storytelling. You want to build these into your personal creative writing, creative nonfiction. Even though you're not writing a story, you are kind of writing a story. So the setting, make sure people have a sense of the scene, and make sure people have the background that they need. So my sister's recipe on brownies, okay? Setting the scene is what? Well, right away you have very early on this image of my sister and my mom in the kitchen, with my sister, running what she's cooking back and forth to my mom. You get a very vivid picture of that. Before that, she gives you background, right? She begins with that short reflection on my mother's illness. And that sets the stage for everything. That's a very short piece, right? But notice the scene is set early on, and then there's this background that's needed to understand the rest is established early on. The character. Stories always have a protagonist, which is the main character, the hero of the story. Now, in your creative nonfiction, especially if you're doing memoir writing, that's typically going to be you. But one thing to be conscious of is that there are different aspects of your personality. So what part of yourself is going to be most important to that story? For my sister, it's the part of herself that is sort of that nurturer, right? That modeled on my mother and how my mother was with all of us. That's what comes to the fore there. Other aspects of her personality aren't there, right? So those are still in her, and she might include them in other stories, but for that moment, they're not relevant. And then think about how to present yourself to the reader, remembering they don't know you. So again, if this were a character in a fictional story, how would you give readers a little bit of insight into who that person was? And then plot, this is kind of important. You want to have sort of a narrative arc. In other words, you want to have a sense that what you're giving an account of has a beginning and a middle and an end. And so think about that. So your story is going to have place, background, character, you, whoever else is in there, and how do you convey that, and then a bit of story to it. Okay. Other very important elements of storytelling to incorporate when you start crafting this thing. Description. Include details, but be careful of details. And what that means is details are extremely powerful. Well-selected details, something very specific, something very precise can paint a picture. Okay, so if I'm telling the story of the last time I had my baby blanket in my hand without ever realizing it was the last time, just a description of that baby blanket, that tattered, stained, messed up thing will tell the history of it, okay? The danger of details is if you get into erroneous details. So for example, I'm sitting in my college dorm room about to put that blanket away, and in my memoir, I do some sort of weird detailed description of the dorm room. The walls are like this, and there's a poster of this, and there's this and that and the other. They're not details, there are a few details to give you a sense of my room that can tell you something about me. What the poster is on the wall will tell you something about me. Whether the room is messy or neat, maybe a couple of books on my bookshelf, these will all tell you things about me. But if I give you a detailed description of the room, the desk was made out of this kind of wood and it was this color, and people do this because they want to be vivid in their storytelling, but those details will actually distract the reader, right? It's too much information. They'll start zoning out, but also they won't know what details are important. So choosing the right details. Action. As much as you can, tell us about your character and tell us about what's happening through action. My sister describes herself cooking, right? That whole paragraph where she reflects on taking that mantle on from my mother, she describes herself cooking. It's an action-driven paragraph, okay? And the point at the bottom of this is important. Action doesn't mean it has to be exciting or dramatic or whatever. Action just has you doing things, okay? Things that reveal character, things that explore that theme. And then dialogue. If there's an important conversation, include bits of it. Now, don't let dialogue take over. One of the things I'll see from novice writers frequently is that they'll remember a scene and they'll want to recreate the entire scene as they remember it. But what they remember first is what people said to each other. So you get this sort of back and forth of two people talking without much description. And they want to make it realistic, and they're really excited about their ability to write how people talk. So they just have all of this back and forth. And because it's realistic, it has stuff that's irrelevant. And because because when we don't always talk, we don't always get to the point. But the problem with that is it loses its impact. And in the reader's mind, it gets to be like two kind of talking heads, two disembodied voices going back and forth, almost like a radio play or something, instead of a scene that will draw them in. So mix it with action all the time, and think carefully about the moments you want to include in dialogue. Dialogue is the ultimate zeroing in, right? When you get right into a scene and you have a group of people talking and you're sharing what they're saying, that's got to be a very important moment, and there's got to be a reason to include that dialogue. I don't recall, I'm trying to think right now, my sister's brownie story, I don't believe it has one thing that, one or two pieces of what people said sometimes, right? What her sister, well, my sister told her once that my mother said that about, if I started telling you how I felt, I would never stop or something like that because of the pain that she felt. But there's no actual back and forth dialogue because it's not really important to the scene. Okay, so dialogue can be very powerful, but use it strategically. Think about what it's doing, and then listen to your dialogue. And it's really good to have somebody read it to you. Any writing you do, it's good to have somebody read it to you because your ear will oftentimes catch things your eye won't. But dialogue, especially when you first write it, can sound very stilted or awkward or whatever. When you reread it, you're going to hear it the way you meant it to sound. If somebody reads it to you, you're going to hear it the way it really sounds. Okay, so this is what I'm going to leave you with. And we're up on time now, so I'm going to describe this to you. And then we'll be at the end, so you'll be free to do this right away. If you would like to share this, you can share it in a comment in response to this video, if you would like to. Otherwise, use this as a place to get started writing that real memoir. So you can close Facebook, focus completely on what you're writing. Like I said, if you want to come back later on and share what you wrote in the comments, I'll try to go back and duck in and take a look at things. Or you don't have to. You can just keep it to yourself. If we were in person, I would make a few people at least read these. So I'd love if you write something you're really proud of that you'd like to share. Please do feel free to share it. So flash fiction is a kind of very, 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 very short story. And it's typically a very specific scene, a very specific moment, a very specific character. And it is, they can be incredibly powerful because they're trying to convey a big message in a small package. And so it's very, very condensed. It's like condensed milk. You have to add water to get the whole story out of it. So I want you to try a flash memoir. And this is also something when I teach composition, I have students do a sketch of their essays. A sketch is sort of a one-page overview of what it's going to be about. Now that's a little bit different from a flash memoir. A flash memoir, my sister's brownie blog post is an example of a flash memoir. It's very short, conveys something very specific, but it's complete. A sketch is more an outline. And so it's you getting ideas down on paper that you later on know you're going to want to expand more. So look at this as either. I don't really mind which one you pick. The way to choose between them, though, is a flash memoir will typically be very narrow in terms of what it's trying to say, and then the moment, the scene, the people that it's trying to say it with, because you're trying to be complete in a very, very short space of time. The personal essay sketch can have a lot of, oh, I'll fill that in later. Oh, this is really important. I'll do more about that later. And really the purpose of that is to get a big picture in your mind. And doing that, right, when you have that kind of roadmap ahead of you, it can be easier to sit down and do the hard work of writing the whole thing then, right? So either way you want to go. So here's what I want you to do. Use the scene, the setting, memory that you've settled on through that brainstorming process we've just gone through. And again, if you're not quite sure what you want to do, go back afterwards and watch it again and pause in those moments. Okay, I want you to first of all, And this is not how I normally tell people to write. I normally say, come up with a title afterwards. The title describes what it's about. But what I want you to do now is think about what your little bit of memoir is going to be about. So think of a title that captures not just what it is. So it's not, my third birthday, but what captures the meaning you're going to take from your third birthday. Okay, so think about that. What is a title that really captures the main meaning of that scene? Then describe that memory. And again, don't just tell us what it means up front. Describe it, and then hopefully you want readers to try to pull what it means out of it. So you don't want to start off by saying my third birthday is the birthday when I discovered that clowns are not funny at all, and they're in fact really scary. Okay, I've given you the whole thing there, right? Why would you bother reading on? I've given you the underlying purpose of this whole thing I've written. I've just dropped in your lap. Better, I describe my birthday, right? And describe my parents. I used to watch a clown show on TV. My parents thought I would love to have a clown. The guy who showed up as a clown maybe hadn't shaved for a couple of days, was smoking a cigarette, tripped over all the furniture. And by the end of that party, I was completely traumatized and terrified of clowns. If I describe him coming in, what he looked like, how he behaved, that's going to make that point far more powerful than me saying my third birthday is when I discovered clowns were scary. I have no idea why clowns came to mind there. I should write about it probably. Show, don't tell. So include sensory detail. It doesn't have to be dialogue, but it can be. But think about all of the senses and try to work them in a little bit. You don't have to every sentence have, taste, sight, hearing, touch, taste. I said taste already. Whatever the senses. But include them, sprinkle them through, and try to go beyond just hearing and seeing. We tend to, when we write stories, this is what people said, and this is what things look like. But think about other details you can include that are important from that day. Was that maybe the clown blew out my candles for me because he thought that'd be a funny thing to do, and I was really upset because I wanted to do it, and that kind of bitter smell of smoke coming up from the candles really stuck with me, and it kind of represents the bitterness of that moment. That's pretty good stuff. I should write this maybe. So use those, bring that scene to life. And I'm not going to make you do this on the spot here. I was going to say get as far as you can before I call halt. So I'm not going to call halt because I'm going to end after I finish describing this. So just go as far as you can until that scene is done. And one advantage of doing a flash memoir or a personal essay sketch is that you can do it at one sitting. And I would recommend doing that. So carve out a time when you've got up to an hour maybe, in case it really takes off for you. You might think you're going to write a page and it just takes off. Try if you can to get the entire scene mapped out before you get up and leave your computer. So if you can't do that right now, make a note of this. Maybe screenshot it if you're watching this on your phone, and then come back to it later on when you can do that. In a face-to-face classroom, I would typically give 10 minutes for this, and some students will have finished a sketch in 10 minutes and others will not have. Most people don't. 10 minutes usually they're wrapping up, unless they didn't have much to say or they're just doing it because I'm standing over them in the face-to-face classroom making them do it. So if you can, give yourself time to write this complete scene. And here's a little trick to get things going. If you're feeling stuck, like you're getting writer's block, just imagine yourself describing this scene to someone you know. And I say a close friend just because our close friends, there may not be barriers to what we say to them in a way that there might be with a family member, for example. Because, and this is like if I'm talking to my parent about something, there may be things I would not want my parents to feel bad for bringing a scary clown to my third birthday party, right? So I might describe it. If I imagine myself writing to my mom about the scary clown, I might find myself playing it down a little bit. If I'm telling my best friend, the scary clown, and then you're probably more likely just to say it as it would have happened. So if you're feeling stuck for this sketch, for this rough draft, imagine you're telling it to somebody. The other thing that does is it can bring in the rhythm of speech, because sometimes when we start writing, especially because we're used to writing essays for classes, we get in our mind this sort of formal style that we have to have. You don't have to have that, okay? Your writing can sound like you, and it's better if it sounds like you. And of course, you'll go back afterwards and make it a good you. right? You don't want a you that's, got tons of comma splices or run-on sentences or things like that. I'm an English teacher, so that stuff will bother me, but it will also bother your readers. Run-on sentences, for example, if you don't have punctuation between sentences, somebody reading that, they feel kind of out of breath by the end of it. So it has an effect on how they read it. So I want you to give this a go. And if you're willing to share it, share it. If you don't want to share it, of course you don't have to share it. But let this be the seed for maybe something something bigger later on. So that's it. So thank you all for giving me your time. And I think I probably went a little bit over. I did go a few minutes over. Thank you all for your time. I'm hoping this was helpful, enjoyable. And I just want to, again, make the pitch. I'm not going to go through it with you, but if you like poetry, poetry is also a form you can use for personal, creative nonfiction. Or, poetry is not considered nonfiction. It's not quite fiction either. It's its own thing. But poetry can reflect the stuff that actually happens. And one of the powerful things about poetry is when you write a poem, you really try to get down to the essence of it, right? Because poems are very short. They focus more on images usually to drive home what they're talking about. You can have them rhyme. You don't have to have them rhyme. If you don't like to rhyme things, you don't have to rhyme them. If you like to rhyme things, that's fine. Just don't let the rhyme take over. If you listen or read Bob Dylan lyrics in isolation, some of his stuff is very well written, but some of it, you get the feeling sometimes that he was looking for the thing to rhyme with the thing. And so that kind of took the song in a different direction. Paul Simon, I think, sometimes does the same thing, another songwriter who writes poetically. And I picked them because their lyrics are written in a very poetic fashion. But sometimes it feels like their rhymes take over their story. So don't let that happen. So poetry is another way of doing this. And I just would want you to feel free to explore this. The purpose of this is to maybe create a piece of writing that you can share with other people that will help them understand your experience and the experience of people in your situation. Give them insight into life, just how life works. That moment when I lost my baby blanket, I actually didn't lose my baby blanket. I had a teddy bear though, that I had since I was a kid that I dragged around with me for a long time. But that moment, what that means, if you tell that well enough, I'll read your baby blanket story and I'll think about my teddy bear story. And it'll be a connection of that human, the bittersweetness of growing up, right? Leaving childhood behind, but also being excited about adulthood. Or you can just use this writing as a way to explore moments, to understand your life better, to reflect on your life, to live your life more deeply in a way that is based not just on getting through the day and the stuff that happens, but on reflecting on what happens during the day and making meaning of it. And that can be a profound spiritual practice as well. So I'm going to stop it there because I can keep talking forever because I love this stuff. Like I said, I hope this was beneficial to you. I hope you did some good writing. If you want to share something, share it. Otherwise, just do keep writing. If you enjoy this, don't let it be a one-off thing. Okay, just keep exploring and keep that journal, keep those ideas together, and just write. Okay, thank you very much. I enjoyed doing this with you.
Thank you, Ray, for that very beneficial and interesting topic. Thank you for turning into the last workshop of this year's Muslimfest. We hope you benefited from learning from the amazing topics we've covered in the last 5 days. Looking forward to hosting another Muslimfest event and having you all. This is Miriam signing off and wishing everyone a safe and fun summer.